have had a very unique journey with sexuality, and it has led me to this place of being very authentic and intentional with my sexuality in a way that I'm only now beginning to understand that not everyone is, specifically in regards to female sexuality. When I was growing up, I didn't really get any sex education, period. I didn't even know what sex was until I was 22, I believe. And I asked my mom about it, and she gave me the mechanics, but not a ton else. And so at that point, media and clothing and gender roles were extremely policed. By the time I was like 22, maybe, I would sneak onto the internet, which you would think wouldn't be a sneaky thing at that point, but you know, I wasn't supposed to be using it, had restrictions. And I would go explore creative writing. Creative writing was one of my big outlets. I began finding out about fan fiction. That was really the beginning of my social sexuality, because I began to engage with other people online, and I still didn't know what sex was. So I would write romantic, intense, emotional, romantic fanfics with other people, you know, role-playing as one of the characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Full disclosure, the character was Loki. So he was a villain character, which meant that he had a lot of ability to vent a lot of the feelings that I was experiencing. And it was extremely cathartic for me to be able to play this character in romantic connection who could be very volatile, who could be very rage-filled, that I had no other outlet for expressing anger or boundaries in my life. And so I began to get into the very, very kinky side of sexuality, again, before I even knew what sexuality was, but he would be engaging in very dark and manipulative ways with his love interests. He would be, you know, kidnapping people and, you know, hurting them or torturing them, or, you know, wearing lots of leather, a lot of things that I later understood was my sexual, my big sexual awakening. Also had the opportunity in that space to get to, since this character is also very verbose, like he's very, very good with words, and he talks a lot in poetry. And I got to express with words and poetry and song and romance and intensity and kink. And also I got to explore my queer identity because I was role-playing his love interests with women, which I found very exciting. And that part of my life was so juicy. Like, it was this breath of fresh air of getting to engage in this sensual environment. And then once I moved out of my home and moved out on my own and came out as queer, I, you know, really learned what sex was through finally having access to fuller internet and finding porn, really, essentially. And I had already developed my sexuality, but now I had more words to understand what was going on in my body, because, you know, when I would engage with these women, young women on these role-playing sites, I did have sexual activation in my body. I just didn't know what it was. And so later on, when I became aware of what sex was, you know, what reproduction was, what pleasure was, and how people considered that sex in the outside world, I was, you know, interested. But I also understood that the picture that I was seeing of sex didn't fully align with the beautiful, intense, sensual, and sexual experiences that I had been having prior to that, on this role-playing site and with these other women and in my head, because the type of sexuality that I was seeing in porn was so focused on this one act, which I had not even known about until that point, and didn't involve long stretches of time of like intimacy and teasing and like listening and emotional play and like edge that I found energizing. And so luckily for me, when I first moved to Austin, the first partner that I connected with was a trans woman. And that was such a blessing. Like, other than just our relationship being a blessing, it was such a blessing that I got to engage right off the bat. My first sexual relationship was with someone who was trans, and it was with someone who was incredibly kinky and incredibly polyamorous, like little to no jealousy, was super open. Everyone can like fuck whoever they want. Like, they just had this incredibly open personality and lifestyle. And so walking into that was great for me at that time. I got to explore this, and most of the people that I was having sex with at that time with my girlfriend were people that were in the queer community. So I was really having sex with mostly women or feminine leaning people, whether that's trans women, non-binary people, a lot of people on the feminine side of the spectrum. And what I noticed about that is that, and also people who were also very kinky. And the thing about having relationships with other queer people and kinky people and polyamorous people is that the presets that we have in our Western society for a relationship don't exist. So, there's a sexual script for a lot of people. If there's a heterosexual couple, a man and a woman, and they're going to go have sex, there is a unspoken script. Like, the man approaches the woman, they are supposed to flirt, and then at some point maybe go out to dinner, and then at some point kiss. He's supposed to be the provider, he's supposed to initiate, and then at some point he's supposed to put her on her back on the bed and fuck her, essentially. And that's what we know, right? He asks her out, and then they continue to date and see each other for a while, and then eventually, after a few years, they get engaged and buy a house and have children and never have sex with anyone else again, at least not where everybody else knows about it, at least not transparently. So that's the script that a lot of people have from a heteronormative angle. And the downside to having like a script in that way is that you can just follow the script. Like, if you're disassociating, if you're not sure who you are, if you don't know what your needs are, if you don't know what feels good to you, you can just disassociate and just get into that the swing of things. Just follow the script and you'll be fine. But if you are not a man or a woman, if you're a trans person, if you're in connection with a person of the same sex or gender, you don't have that. And if you are polyamorous, you don't have that script of how you date and how you see people. And if you're kinky, then you don't have the script about what you do in bed. Like, there's a necessity of approaching someone and asking them if they want to try this and asking them what feels good to them. And so with all of that kind of removed, it puts the responsibility necessarily on the individual to come to a sexual encounter with exactly what they're feeling. And I remember so clearly, I had sex a few times and I felt a little strange about it because I was still trying to understand how sex works, what you're supposed to do, get some social feedback, which was, helpful. But I was reaching this point where I didn't feel my sexual encounters felt strange to me or bad or off or inauthentic. And I watched this video that I wish was still online, but I think they've taken it down, where this androgynous person shared what they wish they knew about sex before having sex as a queer person. And it changed my world. I remember so clearly them saying this thing where they said that they never realized that there are no rules to sex, that they never realized until they started dating women, then they themselves were female, that you can go into a sexual encounter with someone and choose whatever you want to do, and that no one is good at sex. No one is good at sex, because that's saying someone is good at having a face, or saying someone is good at breathing, or saying someone is good at, I don't know what else to say, like that having sex is like an art project that begins with finding your center and feeling, what do I want in this exact moment? And especially as I'm learning for a lot of AFAB people, because I came into this dating world without a lot of context, I think I have been a bit ahead of the game with like tapping into my needs in a sexual situation and really letting that drive the boat. And I really don't give a shit like what is supposed to happen or expected to happen at all, because I tend to believe, like most things in life, that the autopilot of society is not helping most people. Somebody set an autopilot, somebody set a precedent that worked for them, and that's great. But most things in life are so incredibly personal and nuanced that if you follow the script, you're likely going to be hurting yourself or taking away from yourself. And potentially, if you're leading in a situation and you go by the script and expect others to do the same, you are likely taking away from other people's experience if you do that. So if you are in physical intimacy with somebody, especially as an assigned female at birth individual, I hear that you tend to be expected to submit and to follow the script of the man, and so you may have little to no intuition as to that it's even okay for you to say what you want or ask for it. Especially if you grew up in an environment where that was explicitly said that women were supposed to be submissive or to follow. But even men or AMAB individuals, like, they also have a script. You know, you're supposed to be the pursuer, you're supposed to penetrate this person, you're supposed to, you know, take them out, kiss them, provide for them, fuck them, right? And so I didn't like that, right? It didn't sit well with me. And then I eventually came to the understanding, mostly when I watched that video, that we can, like the deconstruction of religion, like I deconstructed my childhood faith, like I deconstructed society, like I deconstructed everything, I began to deconstruct sex. And it was so beautiful, and I began to see it not only as a personal pleasure practice, but also as a spiritual calling. Because now what I believe sex to be, my religion is Wicca, which is a fertility-based religion, and I'm spiritual beyond the practice of Wicca. I love learning from other types of spiritualities, but my leanings tend towards Wicca and really just the natural world, the natural cycles of the world. And I worship a goddess, and goddess being Mother Earth, goddess being nature. And so I get like childlike when I think of her, because she has healed me so much. And this is part of it, right? This is part of it, is that the goddess is that inner knowing, is that intuition. And I no longer see dropping into my intuition as simply a personally fulfilling lifestyle. I see it as submission to the goddess, and I see it as furthering the will of the goddess. I see it as creating permission in my environment for every other individual to drop in and tap into their divine knowing and their channel to God or the goddess or the divine being, and follow their lead exactly. The friends that I know who are witches, I sometimes feel the most resonant with, and I think part of that is when I feel that they have surrendered to their gods or their guides to the point that I believe they would follow them over any other authority figure. And that to me gives someone integrity, but not just integrity as far as like not doing bad things or doing something that helps someone else. But to me, integrity is operating from your internal compass, is knowing who you are and what you want, and knowing how to feel inside your body and to direct in that way. And so that was that. Now I see the pursuit of pleasure and fulfillment and health and vitality and the art and alchemy of sex as like this tool that can rise higher consciousness, that can free, that can be a chakra opening practice, that can be a realigning practice, that can be a meditative practice. And what I love most is when two individuals can be 100% in their divine union, 100% in their divine knowing. So let me try to explain. I approach someone, and once I decided this for myself, I treated it literally as dogma. Like, this is one of my top goals in the world, one of my top ethical guidelines, not up for discussion ever. And I have a few of these that the goddess has sent to me, usually pertaining to divine alignment, where I believe that this is a divine calling. And so this is not up for debate or question. And when you set ritual spaces or host events, and you set the intention very clearly with the energy that we know that this is an elevating energy for me and for the people that I've invited, and then this is how it's going to be, not up for discussion, then the people who really align with that can continue to come to my events, continue to engage in my ritual spaces, and feel so freed to know that we are all on the same page. And people for whom that doesn't align, they know right away, and they're able to go and do their own thing if they prefer some kind of different type of interaction. But for me in my ritual spaces, and the co-creation that I want to make with people, and in the area of intimacy, we enter a space, and usually this is going to be that I have set aside time beforehand, and this person has set aside time beforehand to come together and share energy and share intimacy, and that does not have to mean sex, but we're going to share energy. We're going to be in each other's presence with intention and love. And maybe we're going to go on a walk, maybe we're going to go into a house, maybe we're going to go into a bedroom. But when we come to it, the energy, whenever I meet up with this person with whom I have this intention, the energy begins there. I begin checking myself, making sure that I am in alignment with my divine centering. I make sure that I am in alignment with my internal compass. And if I'm not, if there's something that is causing me to disassociate or be out of touch with my body, that is a betrayal of the goddess. It happens. Like, I've been in a really busy work day and over caffeinated. I've been in an overwhelming emotional experience and not stopped to regulate. I push myself out of my body on a semi-regular basis, but that to me is when I come out of alignment with the goddess, and there's no judgment, but it is not a way that I'm interested in showing up in intimate connection. And so I make sure that at the beginning of my interaction with that person that I am fully in touch with the goddess, because I believe that she is here to liberate, right? You can just see it already in my body. Like when I'm inviting her in right now, oftentimes I'm going to do some of my practices that invite her in, including yoga and dancing and breath work. And when I say I'm talking about the goddess, I wanted to be clear about something, because I am actually a trans man. So I identify as a man. And calling in the goddess for me is not calling in some kind of sexual feminine energy. It is simply calling in my deity, who for me represents centering and anchoring and authenticity. And so when we do reach that place with a partner or a playmate where we're coming together, then is the time to, I love this, because in this moment, this is why sex and intimacy is one of my favorite physical spaces. One of my favorite spaces is because I allow myself the permission in that space to be so in my body. In going on walks in nature is another one of these. This might sound huge, or it may sound obvious, but in sexual connection with someone, I do not allow myself to think about their pleasure. And it's not that I'm not allowing myself, that's wrong. I do allow myself to think about their pleasure because when it pleases me. What I do not allow myself to do in that container is to sacrifice my own comfort and felt safety and desire for that person. So for instance, if we're walking into a sexual situation and I'm not 100% feeling it, like it's not the 100% thing I want to do most in the world right now, then is a no, period. I think that if I allowed myself to do a sexual or sensual act with someone when I am not, be it tiny from the tiniest thing to the most massive thing, when I am not craving and lusting after that exact action, I believe that I am being non-consensual with myself. And not only myself, but everyone like me, everyone who has, every AFAB person, every female person, everyone who has ever been forced into non-consensual sex. And not only sex, but I think this as a practice can help you move this energy into the rest of your life. And it may sound mind-blowing, especially if you've had partners tell you that you are supposed to engage in intimacy, kissing, touching, anything, when you're not like thirsting for it and really craving it, then it can sound crazy, especially if people have told you that you're crazy, but you're not crazy. They're wrong, period. And you should be able to walk into that situation, sit, a good practice to sit face to face with someone and just breathe with them, just be in their energy. And if there's someone that you're sexually or sensually attracted to, or for me, a lot of that can be emotional. So if it's someone that I'm emotionally attracted to, like if it's the first thing that I'll notice when I'm with someone in a physical space before I begin to get turned on is emotional connection. You know, sometimes I tell my friends, like, to me, sex just feels like an Uber hug. Like, it's just when I am feeling close and connected and loving towards someone and just like in love and infatuated and overflowing admiration and just like gratitude and just like feeling this sense of gratitude that this person is alive and that God has allowed them to exist in this world and make it a better place. Allow myself to feel all of them in that moment. And that usually ends up making me want to hug someone or, you know, just gaze at them with a little bit of like, wow, you're here right now. And if I feel And then I'm really in touch with my body and my breath. So if I feel insecurity come up or sadness come up, then I'm going to feel into that and let myself feel it. I think that the worst thing you can do for intimacy is to deny feelings. Like sometimes in the world, unfortunately, we have to deny feelings. We can't be processing them all the time and expressing them. But in this connection, I believe, to me, that is sacred. And treating sex as sacred means that you do not lie. And lying is hiding your emotions, hiding what you're feeling. So even if you're crying and your sadness has nothing to do with them, bring that up. Also, all energy is energy that you can work with. Like if you're sad, then the intimacy of the other person, whether it's just a little bit of rocking and shaking and holding, or whether it's some hair ruffling or pulling close, whether it's just breathing, whether it turns into something where you're rubbing up against each other, it can become a soothing practice. Or if you're feeling giddy and excited about life and energized, and that can be, and you're celebrating, you're so happy that the sun is shining, or that your project just got finished, and you can bring that energy into it, and you can just feel it and undulate with it and just be 100% in your body. And if you have a partner who's ready to be receptive of sacred sexuality, and then they will be delighted. And open up the conversation, open up that door, practice sitting with them and letting them feel. And the other biggest part of it, I think, is that whole there's no sexual script, which essentially means orgasm is never the goal. And of course, our bodies, once if we are in our natural flow and we are following our natural desires and there's no external pressure from the other person to do anything, then if we start to reach a natural wave and trip towards orgasm, then our bodies will probably try to reach it. But even in that heightened state, and even in that pleasure state, even though you should celebrate it and see it as an offering to the goddess and all these things, I still believe that you shouldn't focus too much on the orgasm, because once you give it attention and pressure, at least for most female bodies, it's not likely. And if you begin to really deeply embody your full range of motion, the types of emotional orgasm that you experience and the types of just like full body orgasm without climaxing, just full emotional climax or sensory dance, the pleasure that you can experience throughout your body that has nothing to do with the genital climax, can begin to be so extreme, and not extreme, but I guess just pleasurable and aligning and healing and life-giving, that you may start to actually really dislike and kind of think it sucks when all you do is climax and you didn't explore this other stuff, because that can end up, it does deplete the energy to some degree, and then you're not actually embodying the fullness of the pleasure and the relationship. Contra-sexuality work, which is that not just keeping the sexuality, the energy, the life force locked in your genitals, but through the body, and many religions have oaths of celibacy and similar things, and some of them even talk about that as being a way to retain your life force energy and retain your chi. And I can attest to that to some degree. I believe that. But if you are looking primarily to deepen your connection to yourself, embody and enliven and expand your pleasure, and not only that, but your connection and your felt safety and your play with your partner, then I would say this type of sexuality and sensuality could be helpful. And sometimes I even hesitate to use the word sexuality. I will, because I want to normalize it, that it's not some weird, big, scary, taboo thing at all. And I perceive sexuality to be blended in with everything else. Like, sexuality is everywhere. Life force energy is everything. Like, we are sexual beings, and that's why I'm pointing to my altar, but that's why my religion is like a fertility-based religion and based on sexuality and gardening and cycles of the earth, because how we evolve and how we continue the cycle of life and death and rebirth is through sexuality. Sexuality is synonymous with our life force. Sexuality is not just two types of body parts connecting and a certain localized sensation occurring. Sexuality is the force through which we traverse the earth. Sexuality, you can experience sexuality and sensuality with textures, with fabrics, with certain days and certain weather and water, and the longer that has been since you have, for many people, the longer it's been since you have orgasmed, you may experience these things with more intensity. And the next time that you end up climaxing in some way will likely be even more intense if you have been playing with this energy and not forcing it. A really key piece of my sexual education was I listened to this podcast called The Banging Book Club, which was these three British women reviewing a book about sex and gender every week, and they reviewed a book about female sexuality, and they covered the red light and green light and yellow light system. They talked about how there are a ton of different factors that contribute to being ready to have a pleasurable sexual experience, and they're unique to every individual. That's why it's a relationship. If you're getting to know someone and figuring out how to feel good in your body with them, not necessarily orgasmically, just in general, feel good with them, you should learn your partner's red lights, green lights, and yellow lights. And so they can be so diverse. So for instance, I just mentioned that a common red light is actually pressure. Pressure to orgasm could be a red light, meaning your body deactivates, shuts down, and does not want to be touched or engage in physical intimacy, does not feel safe. And remember, the goal is never orgasm. So yes, red lights can shut off orgasm. Yes. But the reason is because they shut off felt safety. And they shut off sensuality. Like, everybody's sensual triggers are different. So for some, kinks and fetishes get a bad rap oftentimes, but I've talked to you about how I am a huge proponent of the kink community. I am very active in the kink community. I always have been since I started my life in Austin. And I love it. I love it for the explicit communication, for the creativity, for the individuality, and also for this, which is that every single person, whether you define yourself as a kinkster or not, has unique things that get them going, that turn them on, that turn that light to green. And many people have been taught to shame that, whether it's a certain body part that someone might have, whether it's a certain type of fabric or clothing that they might wear, whether that's a certain sexual activity. But for many people, a green light can be like having emotional safety with your partner, having low lighting, having feeling comfortable in your clothing, feeling like there's no conflict currently in a relationship, feeling trust, feeling some emotional vulnerability with your partner, feeling maybe having a certain type of fabric look on your bed, maybe having chores out of the way so that you're not stressed about them. Maybe, spending a lot of time together prior to the sexual connection so that you have time to acclimate to the energy of your partner before you get more touchy. So all of those things can be red lights and green lights. Once again, that can be communicated without the desire to reach sexuality, to reach a sexual experience. Because when you are in the business of making yourself feel safe to feel and connected and authentic and expressive, if you have a natural sexual attraction to someone, it will come up. And your body may begin to move towards wanting to be closer to that person, and eventually that leading to more intimacy. But once we get onto the part where you're actually in embrace, you're maybe even grinding on each other, and you're starting to just undulate on each other, I would say still listen to that inner voice. And if you have something, anything, that feels really, really appealing, and it doesn't seem like it will be received well, I would say definitely do it. And definitely, if you're feeling nervous about it, slow down maybe and say to the partner, like, I would like to, the first thing that came to my head when I was like stick my finger in your ear. That's so random, but that's the first thing that came to my mind. So supposing you just wanted to do that, and you felt that was sensual, and then you had a nervous feeling about it, how they would react. I would say definitely do it, because that's the practice of being in your body. And if you have nervousness about it, ask them, tell them, I would like to do this. Can I? And if you have any hesitation, and hopefully they're the kind of partner that would be engaging with you. But I would also caution you to come to work on grounding into yourself, so that you are simply just in the mode of doing what feels good to you. And of course, I think listening to your partner's energy. So if you're starting to flirt with them and they're reciprocating, you starting to touch them somewhere, of course go slow and make sure that they have a positive reaction to it. And hopefully they are in their truth. And what I love to see is me starting to get sensual with someone and they're just completely not reacting. And then I back off. Because that gives me so much joy and so much confidence that if this is my partner or someone that I have permission to be intimate with, then I feel that I trust them, that I know that they react when they feel like it and don't when they don't, which allows me to just rise to the occasion. As the masculine part of me wants to be wow, challenge accepted. Not challenge to get them, to orgasm or to have sex, but to get them to feel, if they have, this is assuming they have expressed interest in being sensual with me and me approaching them in that way. And so it's how am I going to win her? How am I going to how am I going to make them feel desired and safe and sensual? And what red light is going off for them right now? And maybe it's just time for me to turn inward and anchor back into myself, and maybe it's time for me to recognize maybe they might be distracted with work. Maybe they might be not know what's going on and just feel off. And I feel such gratitude for the opportunity that I had to space hold for someone's reaction that may previously have been seen as negative. Many people who have been propositioned and have, especially by a partner, and have not reacted, have had incredible negative feedback. And so being able to hold space and welcome that and be just cool, I love that you are so aligned with yourself, because I know that when you really want sex with me, you will be all in, your body will be all in, and we're open to having conversations about what might be some of your green lights, what might make you feel more embodied. So I love the practice of feeling love, kindness, or generosity, or space holding for someone, and moving my head, moving my thoughts out of my body, moving into my feeling mind, and just allowing my body to move on its own. express. And whenever, the other piece of that is that whenever I notice an unsettled feeling or a sadness or a fear or an anger come up, to either use it, or if it is dysregulating or triggering, to stop and just sit with it, and to just allow the feelings to move through you, because a lot of us do not have like a lot of spaces in our lives where we can feel everything. Sometimes the things that come up shock you. You know, if you're not aware of certain like kinks or fetishes that you may have, and then you are kind of dropped in, and you're thinking about, oh, you know, sacred sexuality and the goddess and equality and love, and then suddenly some thought might pop into your head about like some kink or something that you weren't even fully aware of or thought had disappeared, or it might be, you know, weird or surprising or taboo, and you might be like, whoa, right? But that thought coming up is a similar thing to allowing our feelings to come up without judgment. Like, and in a meditative state, we allow our feelings to emerge and we witness them. Because as God, as the God consciousness, as the witnessing mind, in meditation, we are able to just let our thoughts come up and observe them without judgment, without over-identifying. And the same thing can be said about kink. We have the practices of like staying in our body and staying in our awareness and staying in our truth and our authenticity. And also when these kinks and everything come up, it's kind of like you can look down at yourself and be like, I'm not over-identifying with this feeling or thought that came up, but isn't it cute that like my human, this is the way their body works. It's like you're reading a manual on how to drive your car, and you're like, oh, this is where the stick shift is. You know, this isn't, especially if you're having a thought around like bondage or BDSM type of things. If you're not used to that, you may think, oh, I'm a person that likes to tie people up. What does that mean about me? You know, and it's like, no, you're learning that the tie up people thought in your brain is the stick shift to the next gear, you know, to revving up the engine. It's like you're learning how your machine operates, and it's a witnessing. You don't have to drive that one way immediately. You can, if you're nervous, you can sit with it, but you can just witness it. And I'm speaking of this in very technical terms at this point, which is kind of funny because this is like such an engaging and like holistic and like healthy and vital conversation that I'm like so delighted that I felt come up in my body to speak with you about today. And yeah, I hope you got a lot out of this conversation. I would love to hear from you all what ways that you have found in your life to feel authentic and aligned and dropped in. If you practice sacred sexuality or tantric sexuality, and if you would take an oath, if you would take a oath with yourself, if you think it would be possible for you to take an oath with yourself that you would never, especially as an AFAB person, that you would never engage in a sexual or sensual act if you were not craving it intensely. And if that seems impossible for you, I would advise you that that is the path of the goddess, not just in sexuality, but in every area of life. Growing closer to her is learning how much you can let go of, and how much more people are drawn to you and enlivened by you and encouraged by you when you embrace the wholeness and the fullness of your identity. And the more you open her up, the more she opens up, the more she unfolds. Voluptuous flower, and just opening and opening and opening and opening. And the more that you choose the things that are juiciest and most aligned for you, and pause and do not engage with things that are not just luscious, the more you may find this overflowing sexual energy that delights partners. You begin to be this full goddess or god or goddess that can go out into the world and shed this light on everyone, which is what I'm doing right now with you. And so I'd love to hear that in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, for engaging with me. Let me know your answer to that question. And until next time, take deep breaths and stay juicy.